In 1874, Prussian immigrant Charles Mining built a homestead cabin on the banks of Little Thompson Creek, southwest of present-day Berthoud. When he married Missouri native Ava Cheatham in 1884, he added a second floor to the cabin with the idea of starting a family. 3 children were born to Charles and Ava Mining, daughters Fanny and Lily, and a son named Louis. Evidence of Mining's addition of the second floor to the cabin is a change in the way the ends of the logs were notched. The original cabin walls rose to a height of about 6 feet, with logs that had a simple flat notch. The walls that Mining added later for the cabin's second floor show stronger V or saddle notches. The family made their home in the cabin until 1901. In January of that year, Charles Mining caught pneumonia and died while building a new frame house on his second homestead claim. He died at the age of 52 years. Following Charles' death, the family moved into the new house and rented out the homestead cabin. Ava Mining and her son Louis took over the family's farming and ranching operation that included a mountain ranch at Little Elk near present-day Pinewood Springs. In her later years, Mrs. Mining split time between the mountain ranch and the homestead cabin that her husband had built in 1874. By the year 2000, additions had been made to Charles Mining's 1874 homestead cabin, and the structure was sheathed in modern siding. It was not until owners Gary and Julie Moon began remodeling the dwelling that they discovered that there was a log cabin inside their house. After Gary and Julie Moon decided to build a new house on the property, they donated the cabin to the Berthoud Historical Society. Along with Gary Moon, volunteers from the society began the task of uncovering the cabin. With a tractor and loader, Gary Moon removed the rooms surrounding the original cabin, while society volunteers filled 2 enormous roll-off dumpsters with debris. After the cabin was completely uncovered, Don Mining, grandson of Charles Mining, and Ron Mining, great-grandson of Charles Mining, visited the site. Hoping to keep the cabin its original site, the Berthoud Historical Society hired log cabin restoration expert Peter Haney to replace the west side of the structure. Later, screw jacks and wooden beams were installed to stabilize the cabin. In June 2011, after determining that the cabin was best suited to be an exhibit at the Little Thompson Valley Pioneer Museum, the project to dismantle and move the cabin got underway. After removing their cabin roof, each individual log was tagged with a number to make sure that it could be put back into its correct place when the cabin was reassembled. After removing the cabin roof, Society volunteers Clyde Merrow, Dick McGee, and Ken Krieger began dismantling the log walls. The next task was to load logs on a trailer and ferry them 3 miles to the Little Thompson Valley Pioneer Museum in Berthoud. Once in Berthoud, the logs were strategically stored so that they could be put back in the correct order. Since the cabin's bottom's logs had been in contact with the ground for over a century, it was necessary to replace them with new logs. These logs were brought to the cabin site to be cut to length and hand-hewn to create 2 flat sides on each log. The society hired log cabin restoration expert Bill Bailey of Denver to lead volunteers through the process of re-erecting the cabin. After a new foundation had been poured, the first course of logs was set in place. A floor of rough-sawn pine was installed before 2 courses of the new sill logs were set in place. Several new logs were cut to length and hand-hewn before they were placed in the north wall. As the logs rose to shoulder height, they were temporarily held in place by 1x4s. After the walls were complete, floor joists were put into notches in the taut log. Care was taken to keep the original character of the curves in the cabin walls. After 4 more courses of logs were added to the cabin walls, a new roof was added to the structure. Local craftsman Tim Vansel installed custom 6-pane windows in door and window frames. Cold weather did not prevent Bill Bailey from shingling the entire cabin in December 2011. Society volunteer Ken Krieger scraped snow from the site to help keep Bailey shingling after a light December snow. In April 2012, volunteer Clyde Merrow tried his hand at chinking the west wall of the cabin. By May 2012, the exterior of the mining cabin had been completed. Work on the interior had yet to be done. Julie Moon helped whitewash the interior of the cabin. Julie and her husband, Gary, had donated the cabin to the Berthoud Historical Society in 2001. The main floor of the cabin began to take shape after the walls were whitewashed. The original ceiling in the cabin had been painted green, like the window trim, but the decision was made to leave the new ceiling unpainted. The upstairs of the cabin was most likely a sleeping loft for members of the mining family. The final touch of furnishing the mining cabin with items that would have been found in the cabin in the 1890s was completed by the Flatiron and Long Peaks chapters of Questers. Members of the Flatirons chapter of Questers posed for a photo in front of the cabin at its original site in 2011. A prize find of the Flatirons chapter was a Buck Century cooking stove with all the parts. It was placed in the center of the main floor of the cabin, where the original cook stove had been. The cabin was formally dedicated on May 12, 2012. A crowd of over 100 people attended the ceremony. The highlight of the dedication ceremony was the cutting of a ribbon at the door of the cabin by the members of the Moon and mining families. Berthoud Historical Society President Mark French presided over the dedication ceremony. The Charles Mining 1874 homestead cabin is not only an exhibit at the Little Thompson Pioneer Museum, but also a place for events like a neighborhood party hosted by Gary and Julie Moon in 2018. The cabin also serves as a backdrop for the Society's concerts in the Pioneer Courtyard Summer Series. Butch Haas's band, Reckless Abandon, performed the first concert in August 2016.